Hey everybody. I was worried that you wouldn't show up, but then I realized that you all didn't know that Django wasn't going to be here. So, the heart of my insecurity. It is wonderful to see you all. Let's
It's great
see.
to see you
It's
too, Jack.
wonderful to see you.
Have I
Yes.
done good? I'm glad people have unmuted. I hope I don't have some sort of mute all setting on or anything. No, good. I don't. Good. I've never run this thing before. My rock is gone. Oh.
Neither has Django. It's all Jimmy Franks.
Let's be realistic. It is absolutely the silent wonder partner, Jimmy Frank. So thank you, as always, to Jimmy. Hey, everybody. It's Gideon Falls Volume 1. Yeah. Rhett, welcome to the book club. Thanks for joining in.
Thank you, Rhett.
Everyone is looking absolutely phenomenal. We are all here to talk about, oh, Mike, don't you shake your head at your own beauty, sir. Talk about Gideon Falls #1. I'm super pumped to do this because Will sort of called out Mike about 2 weeks ago and just was very excited to get this one on the docket and get Mike's opinion on it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, so I've been looking forward to talking about it. I got it yesterday, read it yesterday, loved it.
Cool. Win, I'm loving the hair.
Thank you.
Yeah,
it looks awesome.
Was super pumped to read Gideon Falls again because I had read this book in issues when it started coming out, loved it, and never read past volume 1. And reading it all in a single sitting as a paperback, I realized like how much more of the story I absorbed reading it all as a paperback, which is sort of what I've learned from this book club that we've had. It's been the most frequent opportunity for me to reread things that I had read in issues and sort of realize how different my reading process is with all of this stuff. Had anybody else already read this? Had anyone not ever read it?
I've been reading it in trade. I read the first issue when it came out, but after that, it's been all trades for me.
Same here, all trades. I've read it all.
Okay.
I read the first issue when it came out, and I was like, I think I'm gonna like this better in trade. I should wait, and I think I made the right decision with that.
Yeah.
I just read it in the last few days, so it's the first time I read it.
Oh,
It's
awesome.
really good. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm curious, is there anyone here who this is their first Jeff Lemire book?
It was actually unknowingly I read something from Jeff Lemire before, but this was my knowingly, this is comics, a couple of years back. I read Jeff Lemire and didn't realize I read it. So this one was my first kind of I know what I'm getting into, I know what I'm walking into. But I read this months ago.
Love this book for a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons is that it so beautifully typifies how diverse Jeff Lemire's writing style can be. Like, this is not really at all what I consider to be typical Jeff Lemire books.
No sad kids walking through woods.
Exactly. Like, pretty effective religious horror, actually, which is, I would say, pretty far away from his stuff. Will, do you want to take us just like a quick spin down this book? Let me put you on the spot as the champion of the Gideon Falls.
Well, I think Django's the champion of Gideon Falls because he's the one who got me to read it when I was looking for something to read a few months ago. I don't know what to say. I mean, I really love it. I've read 3 volumes so far, and I hadn't read it at all. I just knew how much I loved it, and I've been pushing it on my brother for a couple of months now. And when you try to give somebody something to read, they absolutely will not read it, no matter how much they will like it. So that's pretty much the case. And I got it back from him the other day, and I had only planned on just skimming through it. And then Nathan sent me a message the other day, and I was like, "What are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about." He's like, "Aren't you reading the book?" And then, I got to pick it back up. And then I went to start skimming, and I read the whole thing in, I don't know, 2 hours or something like that, almost, front to back. Like, I started it before I went to sleep, woke up and finished reading it, just immediate. And I love it. This book.
it gives me like the warmest heart feeling to picture you folks out there texting one another, like the proudest camp counselor feeling or something. Colette, I know you know what I'm talking about.
So basically, we're following kind of dual narratives in Gideon Falls of a priest that first moves to town and is taking over for a priest that mysteriously kind of died. And some creepy stuff happens to him. And we're also following this kind of guy that is seems a little bit off his rocker, seeing his therapist and talking about the Black Barn and trying to rebuild it based off of scraps he's finding on the ground. And we kind of followed that through a bit. I will tell you that the first time I read this, it was kind of off-putting seeing Norton wearing the face mask constantly. And now it's like perfectly normal. Doesn't bother me at all seeing it.
Yeah,
Very
no,
strange how that's flipped.
Totally normal.
I was reading this last night and I got almost the full way through the first issue and I was like, I'm supposed to be noticing that he's wearing a face mask. That's not supposed to just be a normal thing to see on someone.
Just thinking stellar social distancing.
Yeah, last year that would have been, oh, they're not telling us why he's wearing a mask. Why, is there something special about the mask? And now it's just like, oh, he's wearing a mask.
Yeah, because I think the first time I read the first trade the full way through was December 2018, because it had just come out. So I read that straight through, and like, first time I read this, definitely like him wearing the mask is just supposed to be another way of like visually showing us that like he has OCD or some other obsessive disorder. At least that's what his therapist keeps telling us. And then also like, well, do we believe the therapist or not? So, and now it's like, oh yeah, right, that was supposed to be a thing. That's not just, a normal thing.
He also rummages through a lot of trash.
Face, though.
That is true. No, the mask is very good for the garbage, and it also is good to obscure the face. You brought up the sort of dual narrative nature of this story, Will, and just to like highlight me realizing how weird my brain is reading issues of comics, I didn't like grasp that they were seemingly in a different town, like both narrations. Just reading it a month apart and sort of trying to figure things out, I put them in the same place. It was only like halfway through this that I was like, wait, they haven't like connected at all. They haven't touched in any way. The end of this book highlights some very weird stuff that I didn't realize at all the first time on my way through it. But it was very cool to on this one be like, oh, this is like an episode of the Twilight Zone or, Buffy the Vampire Slayer or something where we're just in the same place, but not the same place at all. And hadn't realized that at all the first time I went through it.
But you're kind of right about them being in the same place, but not being in the same place. So
yeah.
I think for the first time probably in my life, I'm in the position where like Game of Thrones readers were, people watching the show being like 3 volumes ahead. And yeah.
Feeling good.
Yeah. Are we going to discuss, are we going to go into spoiler territory though? Because we don't normally like put a warning up front in terms of spoilers or whatever. But yeah, I feel like we should say just, if you're listening, you haven't read it, go read it, pause, go read it, come back, and yeah.
Otherwise you're going to be
spoilers
like right over
1.
Here going like hear no spoilers, see no spoilers, speak no spoilers.
But you volume 2 and volume 3 folks, keep that stuff to yourself. Just volume 1 stuff here. Django was like, yeah, at this point in the series it's almost like more of a sci-fi book, and I was like, I don't know for sure how that could be the case given volume 1, but it definitely, like East of West, this one, really getting kind of the bug to read books in full paperbacks, and it's just weird. I mean, when you worked at a shop, Colette, like it's a weird kind of meat grinder that you put yourself in every single week, and it sort of changes the way that you read a book. So to sit down and reread a thing that you read in a totally different way it's super bizarre, and I just realized how much I didn't pick up.
Yeah, I think
I kept thinking this one would be really challenging to do as issues. Like just atmospherically, it has a really good pacing. It really brings you along.
Yeah, I remember saying last time on our last meeting, I like I'm not sure if I liked the art or the storytelling, like the writing of the book more. And this is another like good example of, I think that the writing in this is really great, but I do think that it's some of the most progressive art I've seen in a comic book. And I remember saying that a lot on the podcast for this first arc as they were coming out. Like it's pushing what you can visually do with a comic book. And Andrea Sorrentino, I don't know that they get quite enough credit for that.
Well, and it's interesting because it's actually much more conventional than Sorrentino often does with their page spreads. And the further we get into the book, there's a lot more of their playing around with layouts and much more kind of trippy conceptual things. But there's a lot that's just really strict panels when they tend to do much more expressive things where you kind of really have to contemplate how you're going to read the page. But it really fits the building of the intensity, and when you get to those moments that is a big trippy reveal of what's going on in this world, it just goes for it. And yeah.
I particularly love the pages where it's like rings of storytelling that progress forward the closer you get to the nucleus of the image. And just like, I just was trying to think of like, how did that artist conceptualize that page? Like, what can I do to, put, and then giant cross paneling, Emily, like I put Andrea Sorrentino, J.H. Williams III. There's a couple other artists I would put in this category of just like, they don't, pardon my language, they don't give a shit about like what you're supposed to do or adhering to the 9-panel grid at all, or maybe they mastered the 9-panel grid and it's just way behind them. Yeah, Andrew, another one, like just for a conversation, Colette, maybe my favorite one right there. Yeah, it's like
And I was just gonna say also, like, the covers on this book are so good.
And each of the issues,
genius.
Yeah.
If you ever wondered why Django loves this book, maps made in faces.
You should see his face map tattoos on his body. He's got some very interesting one. He made one of the shop as Justin's face, and it's
as long as they're not maps made of people's faces.
Yeah, or with chants around them. But
man just loves a conceptual map.
He does.
I was curious what people thought. I was curious what people thought about like some of the upside down pages and stuff. It seems like it kind of plays into this conversation. I found myself turning them upside down, but then trying to take it in as what it was.
I love when a comic book makes me like feel like it's interactive like that. Like I'm spinning a thing and holding it far away. I really loved it. Rhett, what did you think of it?
I thought it was great. I haven't read a lot of horror, and this definitely had a mystery element to it. It didn't just feel like it was. I think I have one other one that's more gratuitous violence, but this definitely seemed like it had a strong storyline. And there's probably still a few images in there that I can't figure out. I think, and I don't have mine with me, but I just remember like near the cross scene, there's this one page that's like a whole something, and I still am not sure what it is, but it's really cool.
I had the same thing when I first read this, and it wasn't until, because this is my third time I've read it now, and it wasn't until like several looking through times at the second time that I was like, oh, it's the person falling and just really distorted, because it is, and it's many different parts in this, like the part that Colette showed with the infinity of panels, and then there's another part with like it's like 57 panels on a page, and they're all super small. And so definitely as a new comic reader, that was hard for me the first time, but the second time through, it was kind of just trying to process it as I don't know.
I was really curious, like, if later in the series we'll see it some sort of visual language, like, oh, when it's upside down, it's, he's in an alternate reality, or, something like that. Or if it's just cool.
I definitely had like there's textual interpretations of it, definitely. What you see a lot, and it's kind of Alan Moore kind of trained a lot of comic readers, I think, to look for symmetry as a narrative device within the comics page. And what we have in a lot of the pages, particularly ones where we're going in a transition or a side-by-side look at both being terrible with names, both the priest and Norton Jordan. yeah, when we're seeing what they're doing side by side, there is a symmetry, but it's slightly off. We're looking at like the concentric circles one that we were just looking at there. They are symmetrical, but it's off. And yeah, because there are some pages that have some fantastic symmetry. The first one that really blew me away was this kind of fisheye 360 view of his apartment. That I've never seen that before.
It also almost feels like if you were looking at this on a flat screen, like it's bending the page for you. So, like when you,
just as you held it up, when I realized it almost also kind of looks like the eyes, like, from back here, it's like two things looking at you, like, Doc or something.
Yeah.
But
so you have lots of pages.
Some great Gatsby referencing here.
You have the sign. Lots of pages and lots of double pages that have this kind of perfect symmetry going on, or near perfect symmetry. So much so that there are pages where, due to the crease in the middle, like when priest's delivering his sermon, you can't quite see him because he's so dead center to the page that it kind of squashes down. But yeah, at the same time, there's symmetrical double pages that the symmetry's not quite right, and that's deliberate. I think that's to make it clear that these are these are mirrored realities, but by no means identical.
And I think the mirrored reality thing is definitely is a key part of that. It is hard for me to say because I'm such a big fan of like giant dumb hardcovers, and I said this recently somewhere, but this series really did. There were moments where the art lost something by trying to pull the crevice open to like see the art there, which doesn't happen in the issues. So I'm glad Django is not here for that reason. He doesn't hear me say that. I think that maybe an issue reading of this gives you something that you can't quite get in a paperback or a hardcover. But Nathan, how are you, bud?
Oh, I'm so great.
I'm curious, had you read this before?
Nope.
Can you just put it on me? What did you think about it? I always love hearing your insight on stuff.
I loved it. The Lemire and Sorrentino, like I started by just flipping it over and looking at the back, and then Bendis saying like that they're one of the best teams, and I was like, oh man, that's interesting. Like Bendis put his name on that, and so I started reading, and it just fits, it flows. And I think the art draws you in, and then Lemire does his little thing where he's like not really doing anything specific, but he's just on his brand, and you just continue reading and you don't exactly know why. It's not necessarily like Hickman where you'll like take a picture of a panel and send it to somebody and be like, look what he just did. It just happens. And there's like a time or two in here that I really felt like went over to my wife and I was like, oh, you have to see like what this made me feel like. And with a lot of the religious overtones, it is interesting to see. It's always interesting for me to read as a Christian what the secular world views Christianity as. And I know for the most part, but seeing it written into art is always super unique. And I think he did a really astute job of just literally telling a story about something with religious overtones. And it's really cool.
I love it. Should we go issue by issue on this one? Like, do we want to talk about, just get into this one? Like right off the bat, issue 1, Rhett, we got an upside down page. It is eerily symmetrical, Mike, but not quite, and we meet Norton and his home and his whole garbage collecting thing. I love the basically several page cold open of this.
I'm gonna slow us down just a little bit. I'm sorry.
Yeah, get it. No,
it wasn't until this time through that I had noticed. I had noticed it because it feels kind of wood or grainy, but how all the shadows have those lines in them that it gives it either that grainy wood look or
it looks like it's a wood pressing almost.
Yeah,
it always reminds me of like when you've back in the day when you photocopied a photocopy of a photocopy, and that like that loss of the pigmentation that would happen. It always has that kind. His work has that kind of like, yeah.
I think it makes
kept
everything
wondering
feel
what their art process was for it, because it almost looks like they're tracing photographs, which isn't true, but it's super.
But some artists
fascinating.
do that. Actually, that's a really awesome point, Emily.
I think Sorrentino does actually have photo references for his faces, because you'll see in a lot
of Bruce Willis
like,
and Lucy Liu.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of their Marvel work has you'll start to see like Old Man Logan looks an awful lot like Clint Barton, and
This
you,
is
you
very
start
true.
to see some of the same faces in more of the commercial work that they do.
Hi, Bruce.
Yeah.
It is.
I was trying to figure out the Bruce Willis, Woody Harrelson
balance.
That was, yeah.
Yeah.
From nose down, it's Woody, but nose up, it's Bruce.
Yeah.
If you're tracing, you could literally do that.
Yeah. What was that, Rhett?
Oh, I said I thought the artwork, although it seems kind of obscured, you can still find these real gems, like the back of his pant leg, where it's super detailed. Like somebody had mentioned it, drawing you in, and I just saw a lot of detail like that. Like I didn't notice the shadows, but now I am.
And not to jump ahead, but I just love the use of shadows in here. And then at the end, when we make it into the barn, the just almost complete removal of shadow as an effect anywhere at all. Just
that it goes to such more of a classical, almost like a quietly, or a kind of that school of art, the more tiny little lines.
That literally is Frank Quietly right there.
I thought the same thing, but I also can't parody myself and say that type of thing anymore.
But it's such a clever way to take, you've got the real, or the world that both characters are living in is this like gritty, kind of foggy existence, and then you get into what's supposed to be the really terrifying environment, and it's so clear and lacking shadow, and so much more of an open, brighter, linear look. Is a really interesting switch from what you would expect to see.
And we haven't mentioned that Dave Stewart does coloring in here. He's one of the three sort of main colorists you see, and their work really, you can't underplay it. They're an incredible colorist, and even in this, like the right after the credit page is this page, and I was like, oh yeah, Dave Stewart does colors, and I do this just sort of like gray wash scene of a farmland, and I'm like, they're really good at coloring, even when it doesn't like punch you in the face. I wonder how much of this shadowing and coloring effect that we're seeing in Sorrentino's art is also, sort of brought to the surface by Dave Stewart's coloring.
Because Stewart, he also, I'd have to go grab my copy to be 100% sure. I'm pretty sure he's been doing the colors on the American Gods comic, and those are also some really amazing colors.
Yeah,
I have to double check to be sure, but I think that's Dave.
All over the board there, but.
On that note, I'm trying to see. I'm not seeing it anywhere on the trade, but is there a separate inker for this? Because it could also be a lot in the inking stage as well.
It for sure could. They don't have one listed in the credits, which I generally kind of assume is then the artist themselves doing their own inking, but could just be that they didn't credit anybody. But I would almost, even just sort of following up on what Colette had said earlier, almost sort of feel like Andrea Sorrentino does their own ink work. I can't imagine what it would be like to trust the amount of ink work in here to somebody else.
Well, I think he also works digitally quite a bit.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think a lot of what his work is digitally. And what I kind of read it was that the majority of the book is digital, and then those few pages in the barn were done by hand.
Okay.
Is what it kind of struck me as. I don't know for sure, but that's what it seemed like to me.
So we roll up to the church with our priest coming into town, and immediately we go by bus driver guy who, again, reading these in issues, I kind of forgot who did what, and it was nice to read this all in one thing, because it was just like, oh, bus driver gives me a creepy vibe, and then 20 minutes later, you're like, oh yeah, bus driver's creepy. But that smile,
too big.
Oh,
right away, I'm
so
like,
good.
that's everything else is so proportionate and realistic, and that was like intentional.
He's a Cheshire cat.
Yeah.
but not
Yeah.
so ridiculously big that it's like, oh, that's obviously like a hallucination or something supernatural or whatever. That's just it's unsettling. And
Right.
Give me
it's
a bit of
perfectly
a
done.
give me a bit of a Jack Nicholson's Joker kind of a
Yeah.
vibe to it.
Right, yeah.
For sure.
That single face made me want to go read Killer Smile, which I haven't, but yeah, just because I know creepy stuff like that is going to be in it somewhere.
We've got to address our therapists' practices. Listen, that's not how the Therapeutic Alliance works. All right, like as a big fan of psychology and the Therapeutic Alliance, gosh darn it, if that's the one thing that this book sort of misses on, which is just sort of like, ooh, that's not appropriate for a client patient dynamic.
Someone who's also a fan of the other main thing in this book, it's also terrible is the sense of pastoring things too. Like it majorly misses, which I think is part of the point of all of this, that like he's just so broken. And I think like Fred Willis is clearly broken, and I think Lucy Liu is also very broken. And they just are not doing their jobs well, and I don't know if we know why or if we're gonna know why, but
yeah, it just kind of made me realize that her approach seems to be like a police chief in a buddy cop movie. It's like, you better start getting better, or I'm gonna throw you back in here.
I'm gonna come hang out with you in your personal life and spend time with you.
Yeah.
It seemed like there was supposed to be some sort of story change or something when she took his mask off, and I didn't understand what was implied there.
Yeah, what is that in that first issue?
That's later on.
Is that later on?
That's like the last page.
Okay, I wonder if that's almost sort of like a metaphor of like now I'm.
Unless there's like another spot where she removes his mask.
Yeah, there's definitely the last.
I think it happens twice.
Number 5.
Oh, yeah.
Because I kept noticing like that you never actually see what's in there, and like what is it's probably just a mouth, but
yeah, you never know though with COVID masks.
Could be an eldritch monster, I guess.
The big smile or something also.
Right.
Or,
I have an important question along that regards with the mask and Norton, and I haven't made up my mind, but I think I know. Does Norton have a neck beard, or is it just Shadow?
Okay, so that's a really good point, because in issue 2, when his apartment is broken into, I want to know who broke into his apartment, but the person that leaves has a similar like bald but maybe just Django chops, and then
he puts on a Trump hat,
and then like it is a good point there. The facial hair is hard to read in these a bit.
I think he does have a neck beard. It just, it's something that's kind of bothered me quite a bit, and I keep getting stuck on it.
Norton, gosh.
Yeah. And they do look really similar.
I think the females have neck beards then too.
This is true.
It's all over. Yeah, Emily, I was curious. I kept trying to find as somebody else in the comic book. There's like a cop that has a similar facial hair pattern, but it is different. I mean, I'm not sure how we feel about wrapping up issue number 1, but I am very eager to hear people who've read this 2 or 3 times without spoilers if they know, but like theories on who broke into his apartment or what that was.
I'll have to say, I mean, it's definitely the scalpel is noted several times later in those issues.
2 or 3
It's thought that the doc has it, but in reality, it's Joe Reddy, the creep bus driver, that's got it.
Okay.
So somehow that guy got that scalpel to Joe Reddy, so he's got a connection to the barn somehow. We don't really know how yet.
He also has a connection to whatever reality that Norton is in and whatever reality, the father is in, which it's crazy to talk about this, trying to linearly do it to beginning to end, because it was not until like 30 minutes before recording this, and I was like, I'm going to flip through this again. And I looked at the final page and I was like, wait, like, have they been in Gideon Falls the whole time? Like, this one says 4 million, but that one is just a street.
Yeah, they're both Gideon Falls.
Yeah.
And they're, and yeah, my interpretation is that these are two different realities that are connected by the Black Barn. The connection that the bus driver has, that Joretti has, is between those two realities is the Black Barn, and probably the previous priest as well, Father John,
Tom.
Father Tom. Yeah, he because he's found dead with one of the nails in his hand that has been stolen from the apartment as well.
It's just reading it in issues, I had never really resolved that whole like, oh, they're both Gideon Falls, but they're different places. And even reading the final issue of this when it came out, I didn't equate that like, oh, we're in these are different versions of this reality, which is super interesting to me. That like, I like comics. I didn't pick that up the first time I went through it.
I'm just getting now, and it's blowing my mind.
Yeah, same thing with Emily.
Well, and the fact that Norton is from the priest's reality.
Yeah.
Seems pretty clear as well.
Yeah.
Oh,
He's
the
I like hearing
I'm supposed
thoughts
to
that
think
I
he's
have.
the brother.
At least you're supposed to you're at least supposed to think he is, with the way they set it up, I feel like.
Yeah. And
So-
I bet it's more clear in subsequent volumes.
Oh
but
my gosh, this book was already really good.
yeah.
So
it's good storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, so in the first issue, when Norton leaves the psychiatrist's office and then he finds the nail, which is really cool art there, but he finds the nail outside the psychiatrist's office, and then you see this view here, and then there's the barn, and then later when the therapist leaves her office and then she sees the barn in that same place, it's almost like the barn is existing in that same location. He finds the nail from the barn in that place. Well, the barn might be existing somewhere else. And then she sees the barn in that same place when she leaves. But now it's like switched realities back, if that makes sense.
Well, that's why I liked on that page you just showed as well. What you're seeing is the street in Norton's reality and the church in the priest's reality, but the skies are identical.
Right.
And then we get...
And then she sees the barn back in that on the other side as well.
Those when both Father Fred. Yes, thank you.
Make you come up with your own shorthands, and we'll figure it out. You say what you need.
So yeah, when Fred sees the barn, and then when the psychiatrist sees the barn, that texturing effect that we were talking about earlier on just goes into overdrive. Which, if you're kind of subconsciously connecting that kind of that texturing as being a sort of gritty realism, the barn becomes hyper real on those pages. It takes up the whole page, takes up all of your field of vision. It's not being broken down into panels and therefore broken down in time. It's purely there, and the amount of grain and texture on it makes it hyper real by the rules that have been established, in the same way that later on, when we're inside the barn and the rules of reality just break down, that groundedness, that texturing goes away.
Gosh.
I also love how every representation of drawings of the barn were done in red. Even though it's the black barn and everybody sees the black barn, but for that little trick of the brain to see an image of something that's supposed to be one way and it's always depicted differently, it adds that little extra wrongness to it, right, and that extra intensity to these scratchy child's sketches. That was a beautiful touch to add to the just uncomfortableness of that ominous barn.
And that drawing flipped over on the bottom, it's almost like it's like a negative.
Side down.
Yeah, it's the symmetry that's off again.
Can we also talk about how creepy the little face smiley
And
skull guy
Smiley,
that is.
yeah.
I
It
put the
hits
book
the
down when
something
that
for
page
me.
happened.
Yeah.
I had to go bye-bye for a little bit and then read the next day. That was
Yeah, I just really love that page where Angie first sees the barn and how like the panel layout just makes it feel like he's getting closer and closer to you until she snaps out of it. Like that's just very classic horror to me.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Like because in like the last one, like you can see her reflection in its teeth to like just show us how close it is to her, and because it's
We
being
never
shown from
noticed
her
that.
perspective there, you
Say
know,
that
like
again?
you're being put in her shoes right at that moment. Yeah, that very bottom one, if you look, like you can just barely see her outline in the teeth.
Oh wow,
That is so good.
never saw that.
Oh,
I'm gonna
It's-
say it has like major Twin Peaks vibes, but without some of the stuff that makes Twin Peaks kind of a slog. Like I was just really digging that, but
Yeah,
Look at the panel above.
totally
They're
agree.
all people. They're all silhouettes.
Yeah, they're all shoulders with a head on it.
Souls in front of the black barn.
I totally agree, Emily. Like it has, especially with the idea that this kind of becomes more science fictiony the further it goes on. I kept sort of drawing a Twin Peaks comparison as well, of just sort of that initial hook of horror and then just kind of allowing it to become a different thing entirely. I'm a pretty big Twin Peaks fan though, so but there's definitely parts that are a slog.
Does anyone watch Man in the High Castle on Prime?
Justin has.
That's one
He's
that
not
Wanted to.
yeah, that this is the first experience I've had where, well, we haven't seen the sci-fi part of it necessarily, but that one was one where you basically think it's a bunch of historical fiction and you're in one genre and then things just make absolutely no sense, and then the only logical explanation is that has to be some sort of a sci-fi situation, and it is. And I wonder if that's how we'll get to this, where it's like the sci-fi turning it into a sci-fi as a subgenre, whereas the back of the first trade reads horror, occult, and supernatural.
Yeah.
Turning it into more of a sci-fi thing is almost like where it just logically or illogically has to end up when you just see a bunch of things that don't make sense. And
we got that like in the black barn, that when the priest has to make the decision between the answers and the girl, there is this like, we've got a very Twin Peaksy machine, you know, that is in there. It might as well be David Bowie. Like it yeah, that was where I was like, okay, we've got like a machine. Like at that point I was like, is this gonna tie into Black Hammer somewhere? Like I was almost ready for you know, for Jeff Lemire to do that, which is another sort of parallel reality story. I guess that the end of this made me realize that I had been reading this book like I read most other Jeff Lemire books, which is not how I read like a Jonathan Hickman book. And this particular book, which is to say, like, kind of on the surface and reading character intention and body language and not necessarily like assuming there's knots to untie beneath all of it. And it's very cool to even the 39 minutes we've been talking about this, to learn that there's like, oh, I should read it again. Like it's not just a horror book, and that's kind of what I had walked into it assuming it was, having read these 6 issues, you know, a year or two ago.
I would say that the art tells so much of the story, especially having read through volume 3, rereading it. There's so much, you know, hidden goodness in it. Rereading it, I would highly recommend. This one where I would be really excited more than probably a lot of the other books to come back and do volumes 2 and 3 with you guys, because there's so much cool stuff ahead.
Folks have mentioned that we need to create a mechanic for reading subsequent volumes of these things for everyone. Rhett, you've got something queued up.
Yeah. So I don't know if we kind of talked about this earlier, but we were talking about the use of red and kind of that other world. And this shot really captures me. He's dreaming, and this figure comes in, and then I love how there's still the current reality with this glimpse of the other reality. And you can, in these shots, you can see that it's kind of that more obscure red art. And then, you know, the next page he goes and sees, or in a couple of pages he goes and sees the barn, and it all just seems like it matches. So I was just noticing, I was thinking that was just like a window into the other side.
Yeah. Which
It
whoever
definitely
just
does
said the coloring tells the story.
Sense red thing. This panel here blew me like
Yeah.
didn't blow me away, but that was an interesting use of an effect.
Yeah.
That's just there and gone, essentially.
Rhett, that panel, just to speak for Django a little bit, which as is my practice, but there are only 2 times in the time that I've known Django where he has been reading a comic book and he has come back the next day and said, this page made me have a jump scare reading a comic. And the first one was that one with the priest showing up in the middle of the night. And then the other one is... it was in Infidel, which is a different image graphic novel. It's fantastic with art by Aaron Campbell. But yeah, so shout out to that page, Rhett. And shout out Django Warren.
Yeah, obviously it shows up. I was wondering and I just read it I realized I read it way too fast. I didn't pay attention to the art nearly enough. But, I wonder about like some of these scenes, because this is obviously, the scene is still all in that same reality, but yet it
seems like they're sharing a floor in those 2 pages, because it's like on the left-hand page, like that's Norden and Angie, and it's on showing the floor, and then the other side is Fred finding those documents.
So I'm curious, I want to pose a question to all you folks. There are, throughout this whole volume, moments where the paneling is done by just a single red line. I'm not sure if you can see that here. It happens again, like at one point when the scalpel is shown being stabbed through. Do we think that the red line of the panel is done just to highlight, hey, this is significant? Or do we think that it's referencing some aspect of like dual location ship or dual reality ship? I'm curious if anybody else, because given that I didn't make clicks that this was 2 places existing in one place kind of until the end of it, I haven't done my reread with that pair of lenses yet. I'm curious if anyone has, and if there's an answer there for some. I guess even this one
for some things, like this one, it's like pointing out just the more relevant. What helps, it really helped me, because again, this was one of the first like comics that I read, like with pages like this where it's just one massive double page spread. It allows you to
Home Alone page.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
That was exactly what I thought about, Nathan.
You focus in on one bit at a time, and you like, oh, whoa, and you see all the detail that goes into like that 360 shot we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm. Like, man, this guy is worried about people breaking in.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel like it's more used just to like highlight particular things. Like, this is important information.
Yeah.
Well,
what were you
I feel like some of these pages too, like a lot of them are these more mood-inducing settings, and then there's a red box to draw you into the moment of it. So it feels to me like it's kind of a tool to like, you take in the page and this eerie drive that they're taking, and then you narrow in on the people in it, or you are seeing that the field, and your first sight is just this big field with the square, and then don't forget there's people here. This is this is the scale of this is the intensity of the moment.
It's still like sequential comics. It just doesn't take, like, it's the exact same thing that we feel in essence when we just go from a large scale in a panel, and then the next panel is a smaller scale, and then a smaller scale, but with panel breaks. And I think it's genius of Sorrentino and anyone else who does that. I don't know if he's the only one, just to say like, you get to look at all of this, but you're just kind of glancing down here. You're not breaking from this to look in further. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, and then there's
said
like
D.H. Williams III. That's very much that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then I was just going to point out this panel from issue 3 where we do have those red lines breaking up this thing, but they're mostly just in symmetry, not in symmetry, in symmetry with the bottom 3 panels on the page. But that one, it almost feels like we're getting the whole thing and then kind of just kind of panning across, taking in the scene. That's the page where Angie tells Norden that she's seen the Black Barn.
Okay. Mike, go ahead.
I was going to say, so for these kind of things, I think it could be interesting to see where is it happening the least and where is it happening the most. So it's happening the least in, like, I just pulled open to Fred being interrogated at the police station. There's nothing unconventional happening with the family out there. There's no red. It's just a straightforward conversation. That's supposed to feel grounded and in reality, and to make his to make the whole situation seem like this is ridiculous in proportion. This, you know, to see it from the police's perspective, basically. And where it's basically happening the most is when you meet Dr. Beard.
Yes, Dr. Beard. Yes, the plowman Beard.
Plowman, yeah. And at that point, that is, it's just the entire panel layout just becomes this crisscross mess of red lines, and it parallels with his own circling of newspaper articles within that scene as well. So I think it's especially effective once you reach that page to realize, oh, you've been, you know, circling these things with your eye in the same way that he's circling these little bits of evidence like a crazy person in, you know, this conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
And you basically bought into it by that point.
And what a brilliant way of making a crazy person scrap wall actually tell a story to the readers. Like, that's such a hard thing to convey, and it actually gave you that like feeling, but still actually gave you the info you needed.
Yeah.
To point to Mike's point too, this page is like perfectly symmetrical, and then you go to the next page and it kind of gets still got the red lines, but everything is a lot more chaotic. There's no order to it whatsoever. And I don't know, maybe Mike can tell me why they would be so perfectly symmetrical on one.
The very next page as well,
I was about to say,
with both of those things, it's symmetrical as well as it's got the white lines instead of the red lines because it's a little bit more factual and grounded.
Well, but notice as well, it's at the top of the page, it's all askew and it's scrap bits of paper to carry on the theme, but then it resolves itself into a level box in a standard panel format that then resolves
it goes back into her encountering the barn and then kind of going off the rails.
I love the going off the rails here. I think Andrea Sorrentino should have at the very least been nominated for an Eisner this year. I don't remember if they were or not, but like there's more, you know, provocative stuff happening with art here. The scene where, you know, like it shows the comic book page that you just read and he's walking out of it and like falling forward is like just one of those like insane depth things. I was going to say earlier, Colette, you had brought up Andrea Sorrentino's Marvel work, and it's kind of interesting to go from reading that to this, because in their Marvel work, it is very like panels inside of panels. That was like very like the Old Man Logan stuff. But it didn't exist as a storytelling mechanism. It was more like before. I love that they found a way to work that stylistic choice into a storytelling mechanic, because in Old Man Logan, while it looks awesome and I loved reading it, it is still just sort of a visual, like here's panels, then here's a weird panel, and here's 100 little panels. And
and like he did the art for at least half of, or if not all of that
Green Arrow.
There was the 2 annuals crossover story of Ava Bell for All New X-Men and Uncanny X-Men, and it was her when she gets sent to the past, and and it was very much these like concentric circles of storytelling. And it was one of those like you really had to study what was going on, and it worked because it was supposed to be such a confusing story. It was gorgeous, but you had to think through the reading of it, and this is still so conceptual, but it's got such a good flow to it. And I think a lot of credit also needs to be given to the letterer for this book. The placement of the speech bubbles is top notch. Almost every comic I read, there's at least one moment where I'm like, wait, did I read those in the wrong order?
It had 2 for me where I did feel like it was in the wrong order.
I had one in here, but it for the most part it was.
And that's like nitpicky, like we read 1,000 comics a week, but to your point, in the credit page, it is Steve Wands is credited as lettering and design, which I wonder what and design is there. Like
I kind of wonder if some of that is those red boxes, those thin red, because it really does help you follow the narrative through the panels and know who's speaking and where the flow is.
I've never, and I don't know about never, but I can't recall a credit that states that lettering and design. You know, that's a real different type of credit.
It sounds like a thing that I'd see in a McKelvey and Gillian book.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like what we see with the X-Men books, because
Yeah.
Tom Muller does all the design with the infographics.
Except there's no those are almost all the things that you guys might know this better, but I feel like most of the things that Tom Muller does in that are not within the story themselves. They're all supplemental.
Right.
Whereas that's why I think it's so unique that you have the person that is doing the lettering and design. And if it's the red boxes, I think that'd be pretty remarkable if that wasn't an editorial choice.
Yeah, that's a thought I kept coming back to in this book, which is just like what is the balance of who is thinking of what ideas here? You know,
It's
like I think
a great team, clearly.
Yeah,
that's where it boils down to. It's just people who just Lemire and Sorrentino, like you just read this and it's cohesive. We read a lot of stuff and it's awesome. And I've read this much Sorrentino with at the beginning of a random Daredevil War of the Realms book, and I remember looking at it and like wanting to get past it because it didn't make any sense. And I've read Lemire with some weird stuff too, and I just love this team. This team wrote gosh, it's good. It's so good, and I love that it means that teams mean something.
And this is their second work together. They did work together on when I think you've also read it, the New 52 Green Arrow run was the first time I had seen their art. But yeah, same team. So maybe hunt that down if you're curious about Green Arrow.
Would highly recommend, even if you maybe don't necessarily dig Green Arrow to start with.
That's what I was going to wonder. I'm not interested in
honestly,
it's a good intro.
When you're totally right, yeah. And
there's a lot of really like great bread and butter superhero books that I feel like even if you don't consider yourself like into that property or into like DC versus Marvel, whatever, there's a lot of books like that Green Arrow book that's from Lemire and Sorrentino that I just feel like is just really good comic, and it doesn't matter if you care about Oliver Queen. It's just really good and will make you care.
That's a skull, and there's like
I
was
about to bring up that one.
Yeah.
I love that page too, like
the
that
coat
their
shadows.
Yeah, that like their heads are the eye sockets and their hands are the nose socket.
It's so good.
Okay, let's just because I appreciate everyone approaching this particular volume in such a non-linear fashion with me. Let's tackle this final issue. Mike, do you want to tell us exactly what happens? No, I'm just kidding. I think it's up for interpretation in so many regards, but I think that it is like one of the most unique single issues of a comic book I've read, especially considered the context, like the way that the art and the style changes so dramatically, while also still being so internally consistent. Andrew, you mentioned the page that is the 6x3 grid of each one being 3 different panels that tell a sequence of events forward and backwards and like parallel. And I've never seen something like that. Yeah. Well, except for maybe multiverse.
It makes me think of those spinning, it spins and then you see the picture move, like old timey.
Like the horse galloping
looks
thing.
like it's going backwards at first. Yeah.
Emily, that's
the impression
just
I
wonderful.
got from it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so who's going to say what happened in issue 6?
Will Elmer, why don't you take the stage from everybody? What happens in there?
I was really excited because I've been staring at this one and I thought it was 6, but it's 5. But this page here, like it took like the 3rd or 4th time looking at it to actually, because I was actually paying attention to the red boxes now, seeing the little tiny figure walking all the way down, and I completely missed that before.
The psychoscape that he's moving through.
It's just doing so much to my brain right now, like trying to follow this. He's walking down like himself into the door that's opening in his head. Like, yeah.
In issue 6, I've looked at this page a lot. This double page.
There's so much going on.
There's so much going on there,
and then it even follows into the next page.
But I didn't realize that like on the following page it shows you that all 5 bottom panels are a woman's mouth. But we see the left page as him in front of the bottom middle one, because on the next one we see that he's standing in front of that 5th middle panel there, which is like the implication of depth there. But then it also just begs the question of like, okay, what else are we not seeing because other things are in front of it? Like if this metaphor is possibly a through line in the book.
I just love this page about how it reuses so much. Like the big red part is like obviously that previous page we were on, but then over here is the blue, which I'm pretty sure is like, I'd have to double check, but I think it's from the previous issue. the blue of him like falling.
Yep, yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah.
And then like down below in the yellow is the top of the next page, except without Fred in it.
It is deeply like visually we talk about Dave Gibbons can, you know, like tell you exactly where Rorschach is in every panel, you know, of the walkthrough. But this is the similar thing of like, I've created a physical space and now let me tell you where, you
Except
know,
it's fourth dimensional.
Yeah, because then like top of the next page, you can see that this like trapezoid up here is that previous red block and him falling down into the next page.
The pages.
You almost could create a 3D model of this and like, you know, fold it out or something, which is.
If you're looking for some quarantine arts and crafts.
You know, I liked hearing what you said, Nathan, about, because for me, the sort of the way that the therapist clearly defied what a therapist in my mind should be, and that I immediately identified that as the priest. And I, you know, there is clearly stuff where you're like, well, he's drinking a lot, or he's, you know, like he's cheated on his wife. But I thought it was interesting that was a thing that was I guess, you know, you hear a lot about priests can be morally a lot of different directions. It sounds like the more we learn about him, but you're right. Like he stands out as like a broken thing in the same way that the therapist sort of stands out as a broken thing.
A person who's clearly not giving themselves to what they've previously given themselves to, because he feels like a failure. And he once upon a time, in theory, was something. And then now we've got a glimpse into what he was doing that eventually broke himself based on his own choices, whether that was drinking too much or having an affair or whatever. And then now he's just completely non-committal. And
he's a Catholic priest, right? Even if he's been having an affair.
Right. Yeah, he has.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we learned that through implication, but yeah, he's been having this affair on this double page spread, we learn.
But I think Mike's saying not having an affair because he's not married. He's just having sex.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Which is a good point. That's not, that wasn't my world. But on that note, I guess we've got a couple minutes left, but I'll take a quick thing to just say like something that I really loved. Is this okay timing for that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, this page is the one that you mentioned. I think that probably would be the best to have in an issue because you literally can't see him in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Because it's not open. This is the page that is him giving his sermon that is led up to by him not being able to write one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which I thought was interesting and cool. And then we go to the panel where he is starting his sermon and he says, why did bad things happen to good people, or why does God let this happen? Which is a question that nobody likes, and that I feel like I particularly don't like, because like I don't have an answer for that. I don't know, and I do subscribe to Christianity, and so it's so frustrating to not have an answer to that at all, or to have it questioned because I don't know. And then I love so much that it's almost as if he's like referencing, he's like, did I figure it out? Is there an answer? And he's like, okay, no.
I still don't have a speech.
No, I spent all last week trying to do this, and it felt like I don't still have a speech. It also felt like he says, hey, everyone, why would God let this happen? And then he doesn't know what to say. And so he's like, did I figure it out? No.
God, how good am I?
It felt like there was a really key moment when he's in the black barn, though, and they're like, do you want to save the girl or learn the answers to everything? And he didn't even hesitate. He just like, yeah, I'm going to save the girl, which I thought was really interesting for someone also who, you know, is a priest who maybe has all those big questions, but without a doubt, he just wanted to save the person who was right there.
Well, and I feel like it's a great representation of how he could have lost his faith, how he could be at a point where he's so questioning that he's gotten to the point where there is a question that he can't shake from himself and can't see past to be able to live in his faith. And that moment of the fact that he's bringing this thing that he just can't reconcile in himself to his first sermon in this town. And then that page of that, no matter how much he spent time trying to write this sermon and write something that would be moving to this group, he just couldn't get past his own block and his own limitations in his emotional and spiritual growth and journey. I think is a really rich but simple way of expressing all of that turmoil within a person and why he could be so angry at being sent to help people when it's what his calling is and all of that.
And then Nathan, it also kind of takes us back to use your statement of just like, see our east of west conversation about nihilism. It's just like, why do bad things happen?
Yeah,
I
we
don't
always
know.
spend at least 45 seconds talking about how I feel so uncomfortable in some books.
Well,
Whatever. I love
I
them.
like as well his "Are you there, God?" moment in the Black Barn, because when
Where the fuck do you
distorted Jesus, where the fuck do you think you are?
Frank Quietly
So-
Jesus.
Yeah, that was
So when-
that was
Yeah.
perfect. I like that bit.
So when he is saving her, how did you guys read this scene? Is this time going back and forth until he gets it right? Did we fall into another quantum leap where he's
I mean,
got to
I'm
fix
kind of
it
with
before he can move on?
Emily on that one about how like it just feels like it's spinning, like it's just him, like, because this is like right after he's chosen he's gonna save her, I think, right? Let me look at the page again.
This is just before.
Just before
Just
he's chosen,
before.
so it's like him realizing what's happening.
It's almost like
He's-
this is him trying to react, and later we find out that no, he has to make a conscious choice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because
Yeah,
she's
I think-
getting
like
shot,
that.
and there's shots as like the bullet going in and out, and in and out.
Well,
And
it only shows it going in and then reverses, really.
But it's a particularly
Yeah.
Twin Peaksy like scene of just sort of, let's just play it forward and backwards 4 different times, and then you make a meaning out of that. Like I didn't pull a specific meaning from it other than like the weight of the moment or the eternity of the moment or the non-linear nature with which he's experiencing time. Like he is, like, I forget who's Andrew said that it was told through the 4th dimension in the Black Barn. So how does something removed from the concept of time view time? And it's that Dr. Manhattan sort of like, maybe I'll do a thing right in here type, a feeling, which it just, to me, it highlighted the sort of alien nature of existing within time after having not existed within time.
Yeah, well, we have the entire concept of the Black Barn breaks time-space barriers because we 2 issues previous as well. We have Reddy's wife, partner. Oh no, I think it's the issue before. She says, "I saw you in there."
Yeah, you're
And
right.
Yeah.
That's
mhm.
I was when I saw that line, I was just kind of like, oh, okay, something's going to happen later that will be her displaced from time or him displaced from time experiencing what she is talking about.
So like before we get out of here, I know that there's 9 of us, but I just want to like Will and Mike. Will, you were excited for Mike to read this? Do you have any questions, any summative statements? Is there anything, let's just this line of dialogue? I want to zoom in on that for a second. What did you want out of? Yeah, please.
Can I narrow it to a specific question? What exactly do you think would be the main draw for me for this book?
I guess a bit of the storytelling and some of the religious undertone based off of your knowledge when we're talking through East of West.
I will say that the first thing that I enjoyed in a very sort of visceral way was just him arriving at the church and the Mrs. Doyle character with we've made you several casseroles, and are you sure you don't want me to make anything? Go on. But yeah, that got, because I was raised Catholic, so there are aspects in there that feel very real, and then the questioning of faith and all this kind of stuff, definitely. But outside of that, I think the surrealist elements, because when we're trying kind of bouncing backwards and forwards, trying to place is it science fiction, is it horror, is it fantasy, is it somewhere in between those? I felt like the nearest thing is it's Kafka-esque surrealism. It's there's some Lovecraftian elements, but it's the same elements that I really liked in Ice Cream Man.
Mm-hmm.
Just that very surrealist aspect of it. You're not supposed to understand. You're supposed to kind of revel in not understanding what is going on at least for a while.
But I think it was like a super on point suggestion, Will. And I've so enjoyed getting to know all of you. And there are some folks that aren't here right now. And Rhett, I love having a newcomer here. It's been such a delight getting to know everyone a bit better. So if anybody else is just like, hey, I'm super interested in what Andrew says about blank, I would love to bring that forward and find a way to do that, because it's a very I dig the community that we've got here.
Well, I personally look for Mike to provide me half of the answers and context to everything that's happening east of west. So
Mike gets a heavy burden, but get
soon.
Yeah. You're gonna have to start reading them all twice or ordering them sooner.
Yeah, my English, my university English education has to be useful somewhere. My philosophy English degree combo.
I was wondering if you were a philosophy major. My husband is, and I was
I was a philosophy major.
Okay, so the conversation of, do we follow up on some of these number ones that we've started, is something that various people have brought up, and I'm curious, like, what is the feeling about that? It's nice to be able to move forward with stuff. I also feel bad about leaving things in the dust. Wynn, what do you think about that?
Well, I feel like the most obvious one to go with, I think it would be great to do just a second episode wrapping up Skyward, since that's a completed series. It's just 2 more volumes. And, like that would give us a really clear endpoint. Middle West would be nice to go back to, but that one, honestly, like, I enjoy it. I'm glad that I read it because of this book club, but I don't know if I necessarily feel as interested in discussing the rest of it at this point.
I'm with you.
Gideon Falls is definitely one that I would love to read more of. I don't remember exactly. I know volume 4 is coming. I don't remember when it's coming out.
This month I looked it up.
Yeah.
It
Pre-orders
was
like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's one of those ones that, like, because of the everything got put off. So but that's my 10 cents for you. Is
awesome. Emily, I saw your hand.
I'd love to finish that and then move on to more Gideon Falls also.
Yeah. Oh, I was gonna say I read a sci-fi book club, and it's really hard to find standalone sci-fi novels a lot of the time. And when people really like a series, it's kind of usually unanimous. That's one that everyone likes, and they just kind of read the rest of it on their own. We'll either schedule a special session to just talk about the whole rest of the series or like what's out so far, or we like schedule a little time at the end of another one where we're like, okay, we're gonna talk about the next 2 books. It works pretty okay.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome idea. I like, particularly Gideon Falls is one I would love to read more of and talk to everyone with. Ice Cream Man, also another one I would really like to do. Skyward, I love. I almost wonder if it would be good to like put a poll up, or would it be good to schedule just an extra meeting one week to do some volume 2s? I'll show up on a computer as often as people want to do it. I know that we've got next week is East of West. The following week is Day Tripper. We could just the following week after all of that. You know what I found out, everyone? Volume 9 of East of West comes out like a week and a half before we would do it. So like it will be out and we will all be able to read it in time for the book club. I'm so excited for that.
Nice.
I just learned
I was planning to, like, I can show you on my planner that I had mapped out that I was going to reread it right now. So I'm so stoked to be talking to you guys about it.
Awesome.
Jeff, I would say, just from my standpoint, like, like a wrap up, like of Skyward, of everyone just reading, if everyone wanted to read a couple of volumes, I think that would be pretty cool. I think Gideon Falls is one that I would love to personally talk about each volume, individually, because there's so much stuff that happens. And I think if we tried to do 2 or 3 volumes at once, there would be a lot that would be glossed over. That's my vote, but I would vote for more of this for sure. And I'm happy to wrap up others. And I would echo Wynn's sentiment on, I just read volume 2 of Middle West, and it was fine, but doesn't feel like it needs to be necessarily brought back.
So without trying to see too far into the future, next week East of West, following week Day Tripper. Would that put us the following week at East of West? And then the following week we could do, so 1 month from now, geez, wow. We could do Gideon Falls like 2 and 3, or we could do Gideon Falls 2 and Skyward 2, or we could do, if you've read Skyward 2 and 3, what would, or should we just throw an extra one in there at some point, which I'm totally down to do?
I kind of feel like maybe you just do an extra one, do Skyward 2 and 3, because then that'll be done. And I'm with Will on this. Like I if we're gonna keep talking Gideon Falls, I'd like to go volume by volume personally.
Okay, cool. So look for an announcement about a Skyward Volume 2 and 3 discussion. And we'll do both in there, and it'll probably not be on a Monday, so we can keep our normal schedule. Is there another day that are good for people that know they would want to be a part of Skyward?
Not Thursday.
Not Thursday?
Not Sunday.
Okay, we'll figure something out. I'll figure out a way to get good input from everybody, or if it just means that we don't do East of West a certain week or something, we can figure that out as well.
A buffer week on East of West does not sound like the worst idea.
Yeah, I know, but I'm like Emily was saying, I'm ready to like read East of West. I could be doing a volume a week.
What if we did a 2-volume East of West week somewhere? So what if we did skip an East of West, but then we did 2 volumes at the same time?
I feel like we tried that early on by saying like, hey, at the end of these East and West, like volume 3, we'll just talk about another book, and then we get like 90 minutes in, and we're like,
yeah,
we all like it a lot. We got to talk about it a lot. That's my, I'm gonna be here regardless, so my opinions probably matter way less than anybody's, but whatever.
Okay. Well, everyone's opinion here is very important, and you're all wonderful.
I'm not being self-deprecating. I'm just saying like, it's not. You could do what I want to do or not do what I want to do, and it's not going to change whether I'm sitting in a new place in my house next week.
Well, I will exhaust myself trying to find a solution that works the best for everybody in a sort of classically Jeff way. And
don't exhaust yourself too much. There's so much going on in the world.
Yeah, it's also really exhausting.
Don't burn yourself out.
I'm so grateful that we read Gideon Falls. Thank you so much, Will, for wanting to put that one out there and pushing it. Rhett, thanks so much for showing up. Everybody else, I'm glad to see y'all. I hope Rhett comes back. I don't know if you want to mainline 5 volumes of East of West.
Nice to meet you, Rhett.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll
have to catch up. I'll call you sometime, Jeff, and be like,
get it.
How's it work? And so
get it.
I
and
really enjoyed myself.
I'll third party call Mike, and we can talk about nihilism for a while and get a group. We'll just have him on retainer.
Send Django our love.
Yes, please.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, he'll be here the following week, and he was sorry to miss it, but he had some family stuff going on. So, the kid works hard. What can we say? But I'm very grateful to see all of you once again. Thank you so much. I'm excited to see all of you next week. I miss seeing all of you in the store, but thank you so much for filling my cup up in this way, because it does mean the world to me. So thank you so much.
Awesome.
And we'll see you all next week.
See you next time.
Bye.
Miss you.